The fluorescent lights of Iron Ridge Penitentiary hummed with the indifference of a machine that had witnessed 1,000 broken men. Joshua Wilder sat rigid in the reinforced steel visitation cage, the bite of leg irons cutting into his ankles like a verdict that would never be overturned. The final appeal had been denied at 9 a.m. Life without parole meant exactly that. He would die behind these walls. In 2 hours, they would grant him one mercy. Scout was coming. His hands trembled at the thought. 6 years since he'd buried his face in that familiar golden fur. 6 years since everything had burned. The door's pneumatic hiss announced Warden Castillo's arrival. "Wilder, your visitor's here." Joshua's throat constricted. This wasn't a reunion. This was goodbye. What he didn't know was that Scout would change his fate in less than 10 seconds. Before we continue with Joshua and Scout's incredible reunion, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss these powerful stories. Now, let's continue. Joshua Wilder had once been the man people called when hope ran out. At 40, he'd led search and rescue operations through avalanches and wildfires, pulling strangers from the jaws of death with precision and courage. His team said he had a sixth sense for finding the lost. Now, staring through reinforced glass, he looked like a man who'd been lost himself. His dark beard had grown wild during his incarceration, threaded with premature gray. The muscular frame that had carried victims down mountainsides had thinned on prison rations, and his sun-deprived skin hung pale against the harsh orange of his jumpsuit. But it was his eyes that told the real story, once sharp and observant, now hollowed by 6 years of a grief that had calcified into resignation. Before the fire that destroyed everything, Joshua had lived a quiet life in the foothills outside Ridgeline, Montana. His wife, Elena, had been a wildlife photographer. Their small cabin had smelled of darkroom chemicals and wet dog. Scout, a golden retriever shepherd mix with intelligent eyes and an uncanny nose, had been Joshua's partner on SAR missions. Together, they'd saved 17 lives. The dog had been at the house the night Elena died. Joshua had been 30 minutes away, responding to a false distress call that investigators later proved was a setup. By the time he'd raced home, flames were already consuming the structure. He'd run inside screaming Elena's name. Scout had dragged him back out by his jacket, teeth locked on the fabric, refusing to let him die too. They'd found Elena's body in what remained of their bedroom. Accelerant patterns suggested arson. And when Sheriff Marcus Thorne, a man Joshua had known since high school, discovered Joshua's fingerprints on a gas can in the detached garage, the case seemed solved. The prosecution painted a picture of financial desperation, a crumbling marriage, and a $500,000 life insurance policy. Joshua's protests fell on deaf ears. Scout had been seized as evidence, examined, then released to Joshua's estranged younger sister, Clara. She was the only one who'd believed him, though even she had stopped visiting after the 3rd year. The legal bills had bankrupted her small law practice. Sheriff Marcus Thorne had built his reputation on the conviction. At 52, with a granite jaw and a voice that commanded authority, he'd become a folk hero in Ridgeline, the lawman who'd brought a killer to justice. He'd since been elected to a 3rd term. Nobody questioned Marcus Thorne. Nobody except Reverend David Cross, the prison chaplain with wire-rimmed glasses and a persistent faith in redemption. He'd spent hours with Joshua, never quite saying he believed in his innocence, but never dismissing it either. Sometimes, he'd whispered during their last meeting, God works through the smallest witnesses. The visitation room door opened with a metallic groan. Joshua's breath caught. Clara entered first, her blonde hair pulled back severely. dark circles under eyes that mirrored his own exhaustion. She looked thinner than he remembered. Behind her, straining at a leash held by a young corrections officer, was Scout. The dog was 9 now, graying heavily around the muzzle. His gait showed the stiffness of arthritis, and his ribs were more prominent than Joshua remembered. But those eyes, amber-brown and impossibly knowing, locked onto Joshua with an intensity that made his chest crack open. 10 minutes, the corrections officer announced, unhooking the leash. Scout didn't run. He moved forward with deliberate purpose, his nails clicking on concrete. Joshua dropped to his knees, shackles clanking, as Scout pressed his head against Joshua's chest. The dog's warmth, his smell of kibble and Clara's laundry detergent, the slight wheeze in his breathing. It was too much and not enough. "I'm sorry, boy," Joshua whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I couldn't." Scout's body went rigid. The dog's head snapped up, ears forward. A low growl rumbled from his chest, not the playful sound of their old life, but the focused, intense warning Joshua had heard dozens of times on rescue missions. Scout's attention had fixed on someone across the room. Sheriff Marcus Thorne stood near the observation window, arms crossed, watching the reunion with bureaucratic detachment. He'd come to witness the finality of justice served. Scout's growl deepened. Then, with shocking speed for his age, the dog lunged toward Thorne, barking in a specific cadence. 3 short, 2 long, pause, repeat. His front paws lifted off the ground in a frantic scratching motion directed at the sheriff's boots. "Control that animal," Thorne barked, stepping back. But Joshua's mind had gone electric. His hands gripped the cold floor as recognition flooded through him. That pattern. That specific alert. It was Scout's accelerant signal. The dog was alerting to the same chemical signature that had destroyed Joshua's life, incinerated his wife, and stolen 6 years of his freedom. And Scout was signaling that Sheriff Marcus Thorne was covered in it. Clara's sharp intake of breath told Joshua she'd seen it too. Her eyes met his across the room, wide with the same terrible understanding. The corrections officer was pulling Scout back now, confused by the disruption. Thorne's face had gone carefully neutral, but Joshua caught it, the microsecond of panic quickly smothered. "Time's up, Wilder," the officer announced, dragging Scout toward the door. As the guards hauled Joshua to his feet, he leaned toward Clara, his voice barely audible. He signaled. "Accelerant. Check Thorne's boots. Check everything." Clara's face transformed. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by the razor-sharp focus of the lawyer she'd once been. She nodded once, fierce and certain. The door slammed shut. Joshua was alone again in his cage. But for the first time in 6 years, his heart was pounding not with despair, but with something dangerous and desperate. Hope. The visitation cage was smaller than Joshua remembered from the single time Clara had used it years ago. 8 feet by 8 feet of reinforced steel mesh, a single metal bench bolted to the concrete floor, and overhead lighting that cast everything in a sickly yellow pallor. The air smelled of industrial disinfectant and the accumulated desperation of 1,000 final goodbyes. Warden Castillo stood outside the cage door, her weathered face betraying nothing. She'd run Iron Ridge for 12 years with an iron fist wrapped in bureaucratic efficiency. But something in her eyes suggested she wasn't entirely immune to the weight of what was about to happen. "You've got 10 minutes, Wilder." Prisoner remained seated. No sudden movements. Joshua lowered himself onto the bench, the leg irons forcing his ankles into an unnatural angle. His wrists, cuffed and chained to a belt around his waist, allowed just enough movement to reach forward. Not enough to embrace. Never enough. The door at the far end of the corridor opened. Clara appeared first, moving with the rigid control of someone barely holding themselves together. Her blazer hung loose on her frame. She'd lost weight. Behind her, the young corrections officer named Dietrich held a leather leash taut. At the other end, pulling with surprising strength for his age, was Scout. The moment Scout's eyes found Joshua through the mesh, a high-pitched whine tore from the dog's throat. It was a sound of pure anguish, the kind Joshua had only heard once before, the night Scout had dragged him from the burning house while Elena died inside. The dog's entire body trembled, straining against the leash with such force that Dietrich nearly lost his grip. "Easy, easy," Clara murmured, but her voice cracked. Warden Castillo unlocked the cage door. "Release him." Dietrich unclipped the leash, and Scout bounded forward. But instead of the joyful reunion Joshua had imagined 1,000 times in his cell, the dog stopped 3 feet away. The whining ceased abruptly. Scout's ears pinned back, his body going statue still. His nostrils flared, working the air with the intensity Joshua recognized from countless search missions. "Scout!" Joshua's voice came out ragged. "Boy, it's me. It's okay." But Scout wasn't looking at him anymore. The dog's head had swiveled toward the observation window where Sheriff Marcus Thorne stood with his arms crossed, watching the scene with the detached interest of a man observing an insect under glass. Thorne had insisted on being present. Security protocol, he'd called it, though everyone knew he simply wanted to witness Joshua's final humiliation. Scout's lips peeled back from his teeth. A growl built in his chest, low and continuous, the warning sound of a trained animal recognizing a threat. Then, with explosive speed that belied his arthritis, Scout lunged past Joshua, past Clara, straight toward the observation window where Thorne stood. The barking started before Joshua's mind could catch up. 3 sharp barks. 2 longer ones. Pause. 3 sharp. 2 long. Pause. Scout's front paws lifted off the ground in a frantic scratching motion, directed precisely at Thorne's boots. The pattern was unmistakable, burned into Joshua's memory from hundreds of training sessions. Accelerant alert. Chemical signature detected. Danger present. What the hell? Dietrich grabbed for Scout's collar, but the dog evaded him, continuing the alert pattern with mechanical precision. "Control your dog, ma'am." But Clara wasn't moving. She stood frozen, her lawyer's mind clearly racing through the implications. Her eyes locked onto Joshua's, and in that moment of shared understanding, 6 years of false imprisonment crystallized into a single terrible truth. Sheriff Marcus Thorne, the man who'd built his career on Joshua's conviction, was covered in the same accelerant that had killed Elena. "Get that animal away from me." Thorne's voice boomed from behind the glass, but Joshua caught it. The microsecond of panic. The careful way Thorne stepped backward, checking his boots. Warden Castillo moved toward Scout, her radio already at her lips. "We need containment in Visitation Room 3. "Wait." Clara's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Warden, that dog is trained in accelerant detection. He worked search and rescue for 8 years. That's not aggression. That's an alert." Joshua's hands gripped the edge of the bench so hard his knuckles went white. His heart hammered against his ribs as Scout continued the pattern, relentless and unwavering. Every fiber of his being screamed the same thing the dog was saying. "Guilty. Guilty. Guilty." Thorne's face had gone carefully neutral, but his jaw clenched. The dog's confused, disturbed by the environment. "Wilder, your time is up." But as the guards moved in to separate them, as Scout was dragged backwards still barking his truth, Joshua leaned forward and whispered to Clara with 6 years of rage compressed into 4 words. Check his boots. Everything. 3 miles away, Clara sat in her decade-old Honda Civic in the Iron Ridge parking lot, gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles had gone bloodless. Scout lay in the back seat, finally quiet but still trembling. The dog's eyes watched her through the rearview mirror with an intelligence that made her skin prickle. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and dialed a number she'd memorized but never called. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. Warden Castillo's office. This is Clara Wilder. I need access to the security footage from Visitation Room 3. Today's session. My brother's visit. A pause. That footage is property of the Department of Corrections. You'd need a court order. My brother's final appeal was denied this morning. He's serving life without parole for a crime I believe he didn't commit. 10 minutes ago, a trained accelerant detection dog alerted to chemical residue on Sheriff Marcus Thorne, the same sheriff who investigated the arson that put my brother away. Clara's voice had shifted into courtroom mode, clipped and relentless. That footage could be evidence of either contamination of the crime scene or active destruction of justice. I'm filing an emergency motion within the hour, but I'm asking you, professional to professional, let me see that recording. Another pause, longer this time. Clara could hear papers rustling, a muffled conversation. 1 hour, Castillo's voice came back. Administrative office. Bring ID. You get 1 viewing, Ms. Wilder. And this conversation never happened. The line went dead. Clara sat motionless for 3 heartbeats, then grabbed her laptop bag from the passenger seat and scrolled to another contact. Lyle Morrison. Private investigator, former detective, and the only person who'd ever suggested Joshua's conviction had holes big enough to drive a truck through. She typed fast. Need you. No. Iron Ridge. Bring everything you have on the Wilder case. Something just broke wide open. She hit send and started the engine. In the back seat, Scout's tail thumped once against the upholstery. For the first time in 6 years, Clara Wilder let herself believe in the impossible. Sheriff Marcus Thorne waited until he was 5 miles past Iron Ridge before he pulled over. The county road stretched empty in both directions, nothing but pine trees and the kind of silence that made secrets feel safer. His hands were steady on the wheel, but his jaw worked like he was chewing glass. That goddamn dog. He sat there for 30 seconds, engine idling, before he popped the trunk and stepped out into the November chill. His boots, standard-issue black leather, polished to regulation shine, sat innocently on the rubber mat. But Thorne knew better. He'd been at the Halstead property this morning, the insurance claim he'd personally expedited. The house had burned clean, just like the others. Just like Elena Wilder's had 6 years ago. He grabbed the boots and a plastic gallon jug of bleach from the emergency kit, then walked 20 feet into the tree line. The forest floor was soft with pine needles, muffling his footsteps. He knelt and poured bleach over the boots in a steady stream, watching the chemical foam and hiss against the leather. The acrid smell burned his nostrils. Should have changed them, he muttered, scrubbing at the soles with a rag. Should have goddamn changed them. But he'd been cocky. 6 years without a single question, without one loose thread pulling free. Joshua Wilder was buried alive in Iron Ridge, his wife's death pinned neatly to his chest like a badge. The case had made Thorne's career. 3 terms as sheriff. Respect. Power. Nobody looked twice at Marcus Thorne. Nobody except a 9-year-old dog with a nose that wouldn't forget. He scrubbed harder, the bleach soaking through the rag and burning his fingers. When the boots looked clean enough, he wrapped them in a garbage bag and shoved them deep into a drainage culvert. He'd retrieve them later, burn them properly. For now, they needed to disappear. Back in his cruiser, Thorne pulled out his personal cell, the one that didn't route through dispatch, the one without a paper trail. He scrolled to a contact listed only as D and pressed call. It rang twice before a smooth voice answered. "Little early for a social call, Marcus. We have a problem." Thorne kept his voice level, professional. 6 years of partnership had taught him that panic was contagious. The Wilder dog. They brought it to the prison for a visit. A pause. And it alerted. On me. Right there in the visitation room. The silence on the other end stretched longer this time. Thorne could picture him. District Attorney Gregory Whitman, sitting in his downtown office with its view of the courthouse, fingers steepled beneath his chin like he was solving a chess problem. "You were at Halstead this morning," Whitman said finally. "Not a question." "Yeah." "Christ. Marcus. How many times have I told you? Change your boots. Shower. Basic operational security." "I know." Thorne's knuckles whitened around the phone. "But the dog, it's just an animal. Nobody's going to reopen a case based on." The sister was there. Whitman's voice had gone cold, calculated. Clara Wilder. Former defense attorney. She's been broke and beaten for years, but if she smells blood in the water. He trailed off. "We need to think about loose ends." Thorne's stomach clenched. What kind of loose ends? The forensic tech who processed the original scene. Patterson. He's been drinking more lately, talking about things he shouldn't. And there's the ledger. The ledger's buried. Nobody knows. Nobody knew until today that you still smell like an arson site. Whitman's words were surgical, precise. "I'll handle Patterson. You focus on damage control. If Clara Wilder starts digging, we shut it down. File a harassment complaint. Threaten her license. Whatever it takes. And if that doesn't work." The pause before Whitman answered made Thorne's blood run cold. "Then we revisit our contingency plans. The ones we made 6 years ago." The line went dead. Thorne sat in his cruiser, staring at the empty road ahead. In the rearview mirror, smoke from a distant fire rose against the gray sky. Another property, another claim, another link in a chain that had started with the best intentions and become something else entirely. He started the engine and pulled back onto the road, his mind already calculating distances, alibis, and the exact point where self-preservation became something darker. Lyle Morrison arrived at Clara's apartment at midnight with a banker's box that smelled like basement mold and old coffee. He was 62, built like a fire hydrant, with a dringer's nose and eyes that had seen too much truth to believe in easy answers. He'd worked Ridgeline PD for 20 years before a disagreement with the chief about evidence handling had ended his career. "I knew this case was dirty," he said, dropping the box on Clara's kitchen table. "I just couldn't prove it." Clara had already spread the security footage across 3 laptop screens, rewinding and pausing Scout's alert sequence frame by frame. The dog's body language was unmistakable. Trained, specific, damning. She looked up at Lyle with bloodshot eyes. "Thorne left Iron Ridge at 11:47 this morning. Where would he go? If he's smart. Nowhere suspicious." Lyle pulled out a battered notebook. "But if he's rattled? He'll check on whatever he's protecting." They started surveillance at dawn. Lyle's Ford pickup was anonymous enough to blend with morning traffic, and Thorne's patrol route was public record. But the sheriff didn't follow his usual pattern. Instead of heading to the station, he drove west on Highway 12, past the county line, into the unincorporated zones where record-keeping got fuzzy. "Where's he going?" Clara murmured, her camera trained on the cruiser 3 cars ahead. "Somewhere he doesn't want logged." Lyle kept his distance, professional and patient. Thorne pulled off onto a gravel access road marked by a realtor sign. Mountain View Properties LLC, land for sale. Clara photographed the sign, then the license plate, then the way Thorne sat in his cruiser for 5 full minutes before driving away. "Mountain View Properties," she repeated, already typing into her phone. "That mean anything to you?" Lyle's expression darkened. "Run it." By noon, they were parked outside the county clerk's office with a stack of property records that painted a picture more damning than either had imagined. Mountain View Properties LLC had purchased 11 parcels in Ridgeline County over the past 7 years. Every single one had been the site of a residential fire. Every single one had been bought at a fraction of market value within 6 months of the blaze. Clara's hands shook as she cross-referenced the dates. The Mendoza House. Fire in March 2019. Sold to Mountain View that August. She flipped pages. The Chen property. Fire in November 2020. Sold to Mountain View the following February. "And the Wilder property," Lyle said quietly, pointing to an entry dated 14 months after Elena's death. "Purchased for $32,000. Currently valued at $418,000. Clara felt bile rise in her throat. Her brother's life had been destroyed over real estate speculation. Elena had burned to death so someone could flip land for profit. She forced herself to keep reading, to follow the thread deeper. The shell company's registered agent was a law firm in Billings. The listed owner was an LLC in Delaware. But buried in the incorporation documents, filed carelessly, perhaps arrogantly, was a single name that made everything click into place. Gregory Whitman, District Attorney, the man who'd prosecuted Joshua with righteous fury and called the case open and shut. "Jesus Christ," Lyle breathed. "They're partners." Clara was already dialing. "I need a forensic accountant. And a federal prosecutor. This isn't just murder, it's racketeering." But even as she made the calls, even as the evidence mounted, she knew the hardest part was still ahead. Thorne and Whitman had power, connections, and 6 years of legitimacy protecting them. They'd killed before to protect their secret. And they wouldn't hesitate to kill again. Lyle must have read her thoughts. He pulled a compact 9mm from his glove box and set it on the seat between them. "From here on out," he said quietly, "we don't go anywhere alone. These men are cornered animals now." Clara nodded and picked up her phone to text Joshua's lawyer. But her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Scout had opened a door. Now they had to walk through it, even if hell waited on the other side. The tip came from a bartender at the Timber Lodge who remembered Lyle from his cop days. "Thorne's got a place up near Copper Creek," the man had said, sliding a napkin with coordinates across the bar. "Brags about it when he's 3 whiskeys deep. Says it's where he keeps his trophies." Clara stood in the tree line at 2 a.m., studying the dark silhouette of the hunting cabin through night vision binoculars Lyle had produced from some mysterious corner of his past. The structure was small, maybe 800 square feet, tucked into a clearing surrounded by Douglas firs. No vehicles. No lights. Thorne's patrol schedule had him working the night shift in town, 40 minutes away. "You sure about this?" Lyle whispered beside her. "We find anything without a warrant, It's inadmissible. Then we find it and figure out how to make it admissible later." Clara's voice was steel. She'd already crossed too many lines to turn back now. Her law license, her ethics, her safety. All of it felt meaningless compared to 6 years of Joshua rotting behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. They moved through the darkness like ghosts, their footsteps muffled by pine needles. The cabin's front door had a standard deadbolt that Lyle picked in under a minute. Clara didn't ask where he'd learned that skill. The door swung open with a creak that seemed apocalyptically loud in the mountain silence. Inside, Clara clicked on a red-filtered flashlight. The cabin was sparse: a kitchenette, a worn leather couch, a gun rack displaying 3 rifles. Mounted deer heads stared down with glass eyes. The air smelled like gun oil and wood smoke. Nothing obviously incriminating. What are we looking for? Lyle was methodically checking drawers in the kitchenette. Accelerant. Chemical receipts. Anything that connects him to the fires. But Clara's attention had snagged on something else. A locked cabinet built into the far wall, crafted from dark walnut with brass fixtures. It looked expensive, deliberate, out of place in the utilitarian cabin. Lyle. He followed her gaze and pulled out his lock picks. This one took longer. 3 minutes of careful manipulation before the mechanism clicked. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as Lyle eased the cabinet doors open. No chemicals. No accelerants. Instead, the interior was divided into neat compartments, each holding a small object on a velvet cushion like museum pieces. A child's plastic bracelet. A man's wedding ring. A set of house keys. A photograph of a young couple. Each item was labeled with a small brass plate. Mendoza, March 14th, 19. Chen, November 8th, 20. Patterson, June 3rd, 21. Trophies. He'd kept trophies from every fire. Clara's flashlight beam traveled across the collection, her breath coming in shallow gasps, until it landed on the center compartment. The brass plate read, Wilder, August 17th, 19. Sitting on midnight blue velvet was a silver locket, delicate and unmistakable. Clara had seen it in 1,000 photographs. Elena wearing it in their engagement photos, at their wedding, in candid shots around the house. Joshua had given it to Elena on their first anniversary. Inside were 2 photos. Joshua on the left, Scout on the right. The prosecution had claimed the locket was destroyed in the fire, melted beyond recognition in the bedroom where Elena died. The forensic report had listed it among the items consumed by flames. But here it sat, pristine and whole, the silver catching the light like an accusation. Clara's hands shook as she photographed it from every angle, documenting the cabinet, the labels, the other trophies. Each click of the camera shutter felt like a nail in Thorne's coffin. This wasn't just evidence of conspiracy. It was a confession. A serial arsonist's shrine to his own crimes. "We need to go," Lyle urged, his voice tight. "Now." But Clara couldn't move. She stared at the locket, at Elena's stolen memory, and felt rage so pure it made her dizzy. Thorne hadn't just framed Joshua. He'd murdered Elena and kept a piece of her like a hunting trophy. She reached for the locket. "Don't." Lyle grabbed her wrist. "You touch that, any defense attorney in the state gets it thrown out." Clara's jaw clenched, but she lowered her hand. He was right. They had the photographs. They had proof. Now they needed to get out alive and figure out how to make it count. They closed the cabinet, locked it, and slipped back into the night. Behind them, the trophies waited in darkness, silent witnesses to a pattern of murder that was finally about to end. The courtroom of Judge Evelyn Hartwell was standing room only. Every wooden bench packed with reporters, curious locals, and faces Joshua hadn't seen in 6 years. The air hummed with whispered speculation and the scratch of pens on paper. Clara sat at the defense table in a borrowed suit, her spine rigid with exhaustion and determination. Across the aisle, District Attorney Gregory Whitman was conspicuously absent. His replacement, a nervous junior prosecutor named Mills, shuffled papers with trembling hands. Joshua stood as the bailiff called him to the witness stand. The orange jumpsuit was gone, replaced by civilian clothes that hung loose on his prison-thinned frame. His wrists bore the ghost marks of shackles. As he placed his hand on the Bible, his eyes found Scout sitting beside Clara in the gallery. The dog's amber gaze locked on him with unwavering focus. Clara approached the stand with photographs already cued on the projection screen. "Mr. Wilder, can you explain your professional background?" Joshua's voice came out rough from disuse. "I was a search and rescue paramedic for 12 years. Specialized in wilderness recovery and disaster response. I worked with accelerant detection dogs in wildfire investigations and arson scenes." "And Scout?" Clara gestured to the dog. "Scout was my partner for 8 years. He's certified in accelerant detection, cadaver recovery, and wilderness tracking. He's responsible for 17 confirmed saves and assisted in 23 arson investigations." Joshua's throat tightened. He's never given a false alert. Not once. The projection screen flickered to life with the security footage from Iron Ridge. The courtroom fell silent as Scout's alert sequence played in high definition. The sudden stillness, the focused attention on Sheriff Thorne, the distinctive 3-2 bark pattern, the frantic pawing at Thorne's boots. "What is Scout doing in this footage?" Clara asked. "He's alerting to the presence of a petroleum-based accelerant. That specific bark pattern and paw motion indicate detection of chemical compounds used to start fires." Joshua leaned forward, his intensity cutting through the sterile courtroom air. "It's the same alert he gave at the scene of my wife's murder. The same signature he's trained to detect." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Judge Hartwell's gavel cracked once. Clara advanced to the next image, the hunting cabin's trophy cabinet, each compartment labeled and photographed. The courtroom gasped collectively. Then the final image filled the screen. Elena's locket, silver and intact, sitting on velvet beneath a brass plate reading Wilder, August 17, 19. "The prosecution claimed this locket was destroyed in the fire that killed your wife," Clara said, her voice cutting like a scalpel. "Can you identify it?" Joshua's hands gripped the witness stand. "That's Elena's. I gave it to her on our first anniversary. It has our photos inside, me and Scout. It was in her bedroom the night she died." His voice cracked. "The forensic report said it melted. They said nothing could have survived that heat. Yet here it is, preserved in Sheriff Marcus Thorne's private collection, alongside trophies from 10 other suspicious fires spanning 7 years." Clara turned to face the bench. "Your Honor, we have documented evidence of a criminal conspiracy involving law enforcement and the district attorney's office. We have forensic evidence of a trained detection animal identifying accelerant residue on the lead investigator. And we have physical evidence that was supposedly destroyed, kept as a trophy by the man who claimed to seek justice for Elena Wilder." Prosecutor Mills stood, his face ashen. "Your Honor, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Joshua Wilder pending a full investigation into." The courtroom erupted. Judge Hartwell's gavel pounded repeatedly, but the chaos was inevitable. In the back row, Sheriff Marcus Thorne rose from his seat and moved toward the exit. 2 federal marshals materialized to block his path. "Sheriff Thorne," Judge Hartwell's voice cut through the noise like thunder. "You will remain in this courtroom. Bailiff, take him into custody." Thorne's face went from red to white. His hand moved toward his service weapon, then froze as 4 marshals converged. The handcuffs clicked with the same finality that had once closed around Joshua's wrists. Clara's eyes met Joshua's across the courtroom. For the first time in 6 years, she smiled. The marshals led Marcus Thorne past the defense table in handcuffs, his face a mask of barely contained rage. As he passed Joshua, their eyes met for one electric moment. Thorne's lips moved, forming words meant only for him. "You should have died in that fire." Joshua lunged forward, but Clara's hand clamped on his arm like a vice. "Don't," she whispered. "He's already finished." Judge Hartwell's voice rang out with the weight of finality. "Joshua Wilder, this court hereby vacates your conviction. You are free to go. The state of Montana offers its deepest apologies for this miscarriage of justice." The words didn't feel real. Free. After 6 years, 3 months, and 14 days, the syllable had lost all meaning. Joshua stood there, paralyzed, until Clara pulled him into an embrace so fierce it cracked something open inside his chest. "It's over," she sobbed against his shoulder. "Josh, it's over." The courthouse steps were chaos. Camera flashes exploded like artillery fire. Reporters shouted questions that blurred into white noise. Microphones thrust forward like weapons. Joshua stood at the top of the stairs, blinking against sunlight so bright it felt like a physical assault. 6 years in artificial light had left him unprepared for the raw intensity of an October afternoon. Below, a crowd had gathered, supporters he didn't recognize, holding signs that read "Justice for Joshua" and "Free the Innocent." Some faces were familiar from town, people who'd once believed him guilty now trying to reconcile their certainty with the truth. Joshua's legs felt unsteady on the stone steps, as if the earth itself had become unfamiliar terrain. Clara stood beside him, fielding questions with practiced deflection. "Mr. Wilder will make a statement later. Right now, he needs time." But Joshua wasn't listening. His eyes had found Scout at the bottom of the steps, held on a leash by Lyle Morrison. The dog's entire body quivered with restrained energy. His amber eyes locked on Joshua with an intensity that transcended the years of separation. "Scout," Joshua's voice broke. He descended the steps 2 at a time, his legs finding strength in purpose. Lyle released the leash. Scout bounded forward, closing the distance with speed that defied his arthritis and age. Joshua dropped to his knees on the concrete sidewalk, opening his arms wide. The impact of 70 pounds of golden retriever shepherd mix nearly knocked him backward. Scout's paws pressed against his chest, that familiar weight Joshua had dreamed about through 1,000 sleepless nights. "Good boy," Joshua choked out, burying his face in Scout's fur. "You saved me. You saved me, boy." Scout licked his face frantically, whining that high-pitched sound of pure joy and relief. The crowd around them had gone quiet, cameras clicking but voices hushed, witnessing something too raw and honest for commentary. Joshua pulled back to look at Scout properly, to memorize every gray hair, every line around those knowing eyes. "I missed you so much. Scout's body went rigid. The whining stopped. His legs buckled. "Scout!" Joshua's hands caught the dog as he collapsed, suddenly deadweight in his arms. "Scout!" Blood, bright red against golden fur, streaming from Scout's nose in rivulets that stained Joshua's shirt. The dog's eyes rolled back, his breathing shallow and ragged. No. No, no, no. Joshua cradled Scout against his chest, his voice climbing to a shout. I need help. Somebody call a vet. Please. Clara was already on her phone, her voice sharp with command. Lyle dropped beside Joshua, pressing his fingers to Scout's neck. He's got a pulse. Weak but there. Around them, the celebration had transformed into horror. The cameras kept rolling, capturing the cruelest irony. A man freed from prison, only to watch his savior dying in his arms beneath an indifferent sun. Joshua rocked Scout gently, his tears falling onto the dog's fur. Don't you leave me, he whispered. Not now. Not after everything. Stay with me, boy. Please stay. The Ridgeline Emergency Veterinary Clinic smelled like antiseptic and fear. Joshua sat in the sterile waiting room with Scout's blood still drying on his shirt, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Clara paced beside the window. Lyle had disappeared 20 minutes ago to make calls Joshua couldn't hear. Dr. Sarah Chen emerged through the swinging doors, her surgical mask pulled down around her neck. Her face held the careful neutrality of someone delivering bad news professionally. Mr. Wilder? Joshua shot to his feet. Is he? He's stable. Sedated. Dr. Chen gestured toward her office. But we need to talk. The X-rays on the light board looked like abstract art until Dr. Chen pointed to the shadows. This is a glioblastoma, an aggressive brain tumor pressing on the frontal lobe. It's been growing for months, maybe longer. Her finger moved to another image. And here, in the lower jaw, there's a massive infection surrounding what appears to be a foreign object embedded in the bone tissue. Joshua's vision blurred. Can you remove it? The tumor. The tumor requires a specialist. Neurosurgery on a dog this age, with a mass this size. She paused, choosing words carefully. Most veterinarians would recommend humane euthanasia. The surgery alone would cost between $40,000 and $60,000, and there's no guarantee he'd survive the procedure, let alone recover. The number hit Joshua like a physical blow. 6 years in prison meant no savings, no assets. Everything had been liquidated for legal fees. I don't have that kind of money. The state settlement, Clara interjected. They fast-tracked your compensation for wrongful conviction. $50,000 was deposited this morning pending the full settlement next month. $50,000. 6 years of his life reduced to a number that wouldn't cover Scout's surgery. Joshua's laugh came out bitter and hollow. That's what freedom costs, apparently. Dr. Chen's expression softened. Mr. Wilder, I understand your attachment, but Scout is 9 years old. The kindest thing. No. Joshua's voice was steel. He saved my life. He's the reason I'm standing here instead of dying in a cell. I'm not giving up on him. Even if the surgery fails? Even if. Joshua met her eyes. He never gave up on me. Not once in 8 years of service, not once during the fire, and not once when it mattered most. I owe him everything I have. Dr. Chen studied him for a long moment, then nodded. There's a veterinary neurosurgeon in Seattle, Dr. Marcus Webb. He's done experimental procedures on trauma dogs. If anyone can save Scout, it's him. Get him here, Joshua said. His consultation fee alone is $5,000, and he'd need to fly in with specialized equipment. I don't care what it costs. Joshua's voice didn't waver. Use the settlement. Use all of it. Whatever's left over, we'll figure it out. Clara touched his arm. "Josh, you'll have nothing. No apartment, no car, no." "I'll have Scout." He turned to Dr. Chen. "Make the call." 3 hours later, Dr. Marcus Webb stepped off a charter flight at Ridgeline Regional Airport carrying 2 cases of surgical equipment that cost more than most people's cars. He was 56, with silver hair and hands that moved with the precision of a concert pianist. "Dr. Chen sent me the scans," Webb said, shaking Joshua's hand in the clinic lobby. "I won't lie to you, this is a long shot. Brain tumors in canines at this stage have a survival rate under 20%. Add the jaw infection and his age, and we're looking at maybe 10% odds." "What are his odds if we do nothing?" Joshua asked. "0. Joshua nodded once. "Then we take the 10%. Webb's expression shifted, something like respect flickering across his professional mask. "All right. Let's get started. Surgery will take 6 to 8 hours. You should prepare yourself for—" "I'm not going anywhere," Joshua interrupted. "I just got out of a cage. I'm not leaving him in one." The surgical suite doors swung shut at midnight. Through the small window, Joshua could see Scout's sedated form on the steel table, surrounded by monitors and masked figures moving with choreographed precision. Dr. Webb's hands, magnified through surgical loops, worked with microscopic care inside Scout's skull. Clara brought coffee that went cold in Joshua's hands. Lyle dozed in a chair, his snoring punctuating the antiseptic silence. But Joshua never moved from the window, his forehead pressed against the glass, watching the numbers on the heart monitor rise and fall like prayers. Dawn broke gray and cold through the clinic windows. Joshua hadn't moved from his vigil, his body a statue of exhaustion and hope. Inside the surgical suite, Dr. Webb had been working for 7 hours straight. The heart monitor's rhythm had become Joshua's pulse, each beep a promise that Scout was still fighting. The surgical suite doors finally swung open. Dr. Webb emerged, his surgical gown darkened with sweat, his face drawn but alive with something that made Joshua's breath catch. Behind him, a surgical nurse carried a steel tray covered with a green cloth. "He made it through," Webb said, and Joshua's legs nearly buckled. "The tumor is out. We had to remove a section of frontal lobe tissue, but the bleed was minimal. He's got a fighter's chance now." Clara's hand gripped Joshua's shoulder. "Thank God. There's more." Webb gestured to the nurse, who set the tray on a nearby counter. "When we were addressing the jaw infection, we found this." He pulled back the cloth to reveal a small glass specimen jar. Inside, suspended in clear solution, was a calcified mass about the size of a marble, split open to reveal its contents. Joshua stepped closer, squinting at the foreign object. "What is it?" "A calcified cyst. It formed around a foreign body embedded in Scout's gum tissue, specifically the upper right premolar socket." Webb picked up the jar, tilting it so the light caught the contents. The body encapsulated it years ago as an immune response. Given the location and the scar tissue pattern, I'd estimate this has been there for 6 to 7 years. 6 years. The night of the fire. Webb used tweezers to lift a fragment from the jar, a small piece of dark fabric, no bigger than a thumbnail, crusted with calcification but still identifiable. "It's polyester. Synthetic fiber. The kind used in uniforms. Scout must have bitten someone, and this tore free and lodged in his gum. The wound healed over it, but the body couldn't break down the synthetic material." Joshua stared at the fragment, his mind racing. Scout had been at the house that night. The prosecution had claimed the dog was traumatized by the smoke, that he'd dragged Joshua out of protective instinct. But what if Scout had engaged with someone? What if he'd bitten the intruder? Can you extract DNA from that? Clara's voice was sharp, urgent. Webb nodded. Possibly. The calcification actually preserved it quite well. Any biological material, blood, saliva, skin cells, would still be viable for testing. Clara was already on her phone. Lyle, I need you at the clinic. No. And bring evidence bags. She turned to Webb. Doctor, that fabric is evidence in a murder investigation. We need chain of custody documentation immediately. Within an hour, the clinic had transformed into a makeshift crime scene. Lyle photographed the specimen from every angle while Webb dictated detailed notes about the extraction. A state forensic tech arrived with proper evidence containers and witnessed the transfer. If this matches Thorne's uniform, Lyle said quietly, sealing the bag, it puts him at the scene. Not as a first responder, but as the perpetrator. Scout bit him during the attack. Joshua's hands trembled as he watched the evidence bag disappear into the text case. Scout had carried the truth in his body for 6 years. Every meal, every run, every moment of loyalty and love, all while harboring the one piece of evidence that could finish what he'd started in that visitation room. The dog solved his own case, Webb murmured, something like awe in his voice. Clara's phone buzzed. She read the message, then looked up with fierce satisfaction. Federal prosecutor wants the sample expedited. They're running DNA against Thorne's service record. She checked her watch. We'll have preliminary results in 6 hours. Joshua finally allowed himself to move, his legs carrying him to the recovery room where Scout lay sedated, his head wrapped in white bandages, his chest rising and falling with mechanical assistance. Joshua placed his hand gently on Scout's paw. You did it, boy, he whispered. You brought her killer to justice. Now you just have to come back to me. The heart monitor beeped steadily, and somewhere in the depths of medicated sleep, Scout's paw twitched against Joshua's palm. 3 months later, Scout lifted his head from the warm wooden deck, his amber eyes tracking a pair of eagles circling above Crystal Lake. The surgical scar had healed to a thin line beneath his fur, hidden except when Joshua ran his fingers over it during their evening routine. The DNA results had been irrefutable. Sheriff Marcus Thorne's genetic material, matched with 99.7% certainty, embedded in fabric from his 2019 duty uniform. Combined with the trophy collection, the shell company records, and Scout's accelerant alert, the federal case had been airtight. Thorne was sentenced to life without parole in the same prison where Joshua had spent 6 years. District Attorney Whitman took a plea deal: 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and racketeering. Joshua sat beside Scout on the deck of their small cabin, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. The settlement money, what little remained after Scout's surgery, had been enough for this. A quiet place where the only sounds were wind through pines and the occasional splash of trout breaking the lake's surface. Scout's recovery had been slow. He moved with a slight limp now, his energy limited to short walks and lazy afternoons in the sun. But his eyes were clear, his tail still wagged when Joshua spoke, and sometimes, when the light hit just right, Joshua swore the dog smiled. "We made it, boy," Joshua murmured, scratching behind Scout's graying ears. "Against every odd, we made it." Scout's tail thumped against the deck twice, then settled. His head rested on Joshua's lap with the weight of absolute trust. Somewhere across the lake, a loon called out. The sound echoed off the water like a benediction. Joshua closed his eyes and breathed in the smell of pine and lake water and freedom. Elena's memory no longer burned. It warmed. He'd scattered her ashes here last week, finally able to say goodbye properly. Scout had sat beside him during the ceremony, silent and understanding in the way only dogs can be. They'd saved each other. Scout had refused to let Joshua die in that fire 6 years ago. Joshua had refused to let Scout die 3 months ago. And in between, a 9-year-old dog with a nose for truth had brought down a killer and rewritten both their futures. Justice, Joshua had learned, didn't always come from courtrooms and lawyers. Sometimes it came from loyalty, from love, from a golden retriever shepherd mix who'd carried the truth in his bones and waited 6 years to tell it. Scout's breathing deepened into sleep. Joshua didn't move, content to sit there as the sun set and the stars emerged. For the first time in 6 years, he had nowhere to be, no cell to return to, no appeals to file. Just a cabin, a lake, a dog who'd saved his life, and finally, impossibly, peace. If this story of loyalty, justice, and redemption moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to never miss another powerful tale. Scout and Joshua's journey proves that the truth always finds a way, sometimes through the most unexpected witnesses. What did you think of Scout's incredible role in solving the case? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let us know where you're watching from. Ready for another gripping story? Click the video on your screen now. You won't want to miss what happens next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.